Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Good evening and welcome to Thursday, August 19th, 2021. This is What Do You Think? A call-in program. Every Thursday from 5:45 to roughly 6:30. My name is Bill Morse, and as I just mentioned, this is a call-in program. In a minute or two, you will see Zoom call-in information or the numbers that you need to use to join the conversation. I'm on right now with Kurt, and last week, first of all, I wanted to, my secretary, I have a secretary that actually does research for the program. She prefers to remain nameless, and we will respect that request. But anyway, she came up with a yearly calendar, and it starts with 2000, and I'm going to quickly read through this calendar. It goes from 2000 to 2021, and there's a couple of years that are skipped because there was no major event, but I just wanted to jog a few people's memories, especially if you're older than 20 years old, or even if you're younger than 20, you may have heard of some of these events. Year 2000, second millennial, Y2K. If you don't know what Y2K is, Y2K was the scare in which many professionals, many experts in technology predicted that because the year was going from 1999 to 2000, that change in the calendar year would shut down the internet. Obviously, it did not, so it was a false alarm. 2001, anthrax. 2002, West Nile virus. 2003, SARS virus, SARS outbreak. 2004, there was a break. 2005, there was the bird flu. 2006, E. coli. 2008, we had a financial collapse. Generally, if you wrote it through, you made out all right. The people that did not make out all right were the ones who panicked and sold. My mother is an example, and she lost roughly 30 to 40% of her savings. 2009, swine flu. 2010, we got another break. 2011, the break persisted. 2012, the Mayan calendar predicted that the world would end. 2013, the experts were saying that North Korea would start World War III. The same leader, Kim, is still in charge of North Korea. We have not had World War III. I think we're in a different type of war right now, but that's for another program. 2014, Ebola. 2015, we're shifting now from viruses and diseases to terror groups. 2015, ISIS. 2016, the Zika virus, which I'm totally unfamiliar with. 2017, 2018, and 2019, there was a break. 2020, of course, Corona. And 2021, the Delta variant. So if you were to categorize these events, they would either fall in line with the vast majority with a type of flu or virus that I'm going to venture to say was man-made in practically all cases. Terror group, a terror country, which is what North Korea has been called through its missile development and rather narrow view of how things are in the world. And it seems that we are continually dealing with either the threat of virus, the threat of terrorism, in that with the exception of 3 or 4 years in the last 20 years, the media and the experts, government officials have kept us on the edge of our seats. Certainly the last 20 years, we've been involved with a seemingly endless war in Afghanistan. And that's my segue. We have the Delta variant, and on the side, we have had for the last 20 years the situation in Afghanistan. And just a brief history, and Kurt, if I leave anything out that you feel is important, please cut me off. But I remember I spent 2 years in France in the late 70s, and I made very good friends with Abdul. Abdul was from Kabul, Afghanistan, and he was very worried, this was in 77, about the president, Daoud, of Afghanistan, and that Daoud was leaving the country vulnerable to foreign interference. And 79, that foreign interference arrived. Kurt, do you remember what happened roughly in 79 in Afghanistan? Who came in and tried to take control of the country?
Well, pick one. You could be inferring either
I'll give you a choice.
Or the Mujahideen.
Okay, I'll give you a choice of where I'm aiming for this. I'm talking about a world power.
Oh, okay. Well, certainly Russia was involved at that time.
Right, the Soviet Union, I believe,
Soviet Union, yeah.
in 79 decided to invade Afghanistan and secure part of its southern border, which ran along with Afghanistan. Afghanistan is, and this is quite understandable, really off the radar for most Americans. The other side of the world, it's a very mountainous, arid country. It borders with between Iran on the left side, or the west side, and Pakistan on the east side. It's kind of like you have on one side you have Pakistan, the other side Iran, and in the middle you have Afghanistan, which is roughly the size of Texas, and has major cities with populations of a couple of 100,000. And these urban centers, it's interesting, there's no suburbs. You're either in the city or you're out in the desert or perhaps in an area, depending on the elevation, because most of the country, I believe I mentioned this last week, the elevation is at least a mile high. So you're talking 50% of the country lies at a level 6,000 feet and higher. So it's not for the faint of heart. It's a very rough, demanding, unforgiving place to live. And the Russian troops found that out. And they were involved in what would become their version of Vietnam, an unwinnable war against a foe that they could not fight with conventional weapons. a foe that did not recognize rules, that did not recognize cultural norms, and a culture that had a very strong belief system that was based on uh, a spiritual presence of mind. I'll leave it at that. As opposed to the official atheistic regime that was the Soviet Union at the time. So, Soviet Union was there for, I'm going to say till, what would you say, early 90s or late 80s, Kurt?
90s.
Yeah, so
I don't know the exact year that they actually completely pulled out, similar to what we're doing now. It was a single event where they finally said enough's enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, it had to be at least late 80s.
Right. I'm going to venture to say maybe 89 or 90 because the Soviet Union, under the stewardship of Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the he's not prime minister, premier, thank you, premier of the Soviet Union, saw the breakup of the Union into separate independent nations, Russia being one of them, and also called it quits on a war that he saw his forces, Russia, would not be able to win. And so there was kind of a limbo period in the 90s. There was a group of university students calling themselves the Taliban, which means students in Arabic, in Pakistan. And they wanted to bring in a fundamentalist Islamic republic, or convert Islamic republic into Afghanistan, and kind of protect or install a value system, which we talked about last week. Part of it is Sharia law, which concerns private behavior and public behavior. Very punitive system if people did not follow the edicts of the Quran, which was the book written by the Prophet Muhammad, whose word is not debatable. And so I was doing a little homework, and it was interesting. The Taliban saw that the growth of poppies, because I think that's the #1 export of Afghanistan. It's not corn, it's not soybeans, it's not copper, it's poppies. And under these flowers and fields, just like behind me, these are, they're called Rapsblumen or canola flowers. And this is in Saxony in eastern Germany. But picture these fields with multicolored flowers, and that will give you a small idea of poppy fields. And there's a sac at the base. The sac is split open, and inside you have the essence of what is processed into heroin. And so the Taliban said to themselves, I'm just paraphrasing, how can we have a belief system that follows the Quran and tolerate people that are growing poppies for heroin production? So they were very successful. I think by 2000, Kurt, they brought the poppy production to an abrupt stop, almost brought it down from, I'm going to say, 3,000 or 4,000 tons a year to under 50, which was quite an accomplishment, because I believe you have between 500 and 600,000 people involved in the growing of poppies, farmers. And evidently the climate and the soil is perfect for it. I don't know if it's adaptable for growing what we call cash crops or food crops. But anyway, that was the economy. Actually, poppies or heroin account for, I'm going to say, half of the gross domestic product. So half of their exports. The value of their exports is heroin, processed from the poppies. So they brought it down to zero, and they were kind of keeping the country. I don't know what else they gave the farmers to do, because it's a very poor country. You have to substitute one thing for the other. You cannot just have people sitting around getting hungry. So I'm not sure that's something that would bear further investigation, how the Taliban supported an economy that fed people without relying heavily on heroin or the cultivation of poppies, so poppy fields. So that would be interesting. Any ideas on that, Kurt? I'm just throwing this out here. It's an interesting quandary, or I should say interesting, but it's something I don't think we're really aware of. Any ideas or thoughts on that?
I was aware that their primary cultivation was for poppies. I do remember that. The unfortunate thing is, it'd be nice if we had a veteran from Afghanistan to call in. Really, I have no idea what they substituted for farming, because I did hear about that, but I've never heard what funded those farmers. How did they make a living once that was pulled back?
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully someone out there would call in and that's been on the ground there, and I'm sure they're aware of what that alternate crop would be now.
Well, interesting. The situation, such as it was with the Taliban in 2000, lasted exactly a year and a half, because 9/11, 2001, we had the attack at the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C., and then I believe the downed aircraft in Pennsylvania. So I remember within a month's time, by the middle of October 2001, we had troops invading Afghanistan. And interesting detail is that the Taliban, and our troops were there because they were looking for Osama bin Laden, who was purportedly or allegedly the mastermind behind the plane attacks. Plane attacks that in New York alone killed 5,000 people. And the Taliban, supposedly, from one news source that I've looked at, offered to turn over Osama bin Laden to a third party. But again, we're talking people like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld behind, and George Bush Sr., the son being in office and being, I'll say it, a puppet, being manipulated by these forces behind him from his father's administration, these people going back to the 80s. They wanted a war, and they wanted to go in and use technology and American force to, I'm going to use the word subjugate, or bring the country over under American control. Interestingly enough, do you know where, I think President Obama, during his administration, wasn't that when bin Laden was finally located, Kurt?
Tora Bora, in the mountains of Tora Bora is where I think they were located.
Is that in Pakistan or Afghanistan?
No. Actually, towards the end of him being in Afghanistan, he was actually located through intelligence, and that's when they were using, I don't know if you recall, these things called daisy cutters, which were incredible bombs that could blow out in caves and just totally eviscerate them. And he was located in that area, and then the decision was made that let the locals capture him rather than the Americans. It would go better. And that was a time when he was surreptitiously kind of swooped out of Afghanistan and then ended up in Pakistan protected.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we actually had spotted him, located him, and we really had the finger on the trigger, and they let it go. And then it ended up being years beyond that where they finally had located him.
Right. That's something else that has not been discussed very much, is the connection between the Taliban and Pakistan. The military, which controls Pakistan, I wouldn't call Pakistan a democracy, although where is there a democracy nowadays except for certain countries, perhaps, here and there. But the military controls Pakistan, and especially the area that borders with Afghanistan. And so there's total cooperation between the Taliban and the Pakistani military. And this is the case right now. It's interesting, we've given Pakistan, I'm sure, over the last 20 years, at least $1 billion in weaponry, and a lot of that weaponry has been transferred to the Taliban, the group that our soldiers have been trying to, control or minimize their impact or their influence on not so much the cities, but the rural areas where it's very easy to hide and maintain a guerrilla war, which is what's been happening. So we entered in 2011. We had two different presidents in Afghanistan that we supported. First one was Karzai, and Karzai was interesting. He had a brother who was evidently once the Taliban left, the growing of poppy fields resumed and actually came back to roar. And you had warlords, drug lords / warlords, militarized groups that controlled certain areas, especially in the southern part of Afghanistan. I believe that's part of what's called the Golden Triangle of poppy production. And the brother of Ahmed Karzai was the brother. I forget what the president's first name was, but President Karzai. His brother was one of these drug lords. He was the largest one, I believe, in southern part of Afghanistan. And so you have, it's very interesting, you have the U.S. troops there and civilian employees that are trying to supposedly eradicate or reduce the production of heroin. And again, the question is, Kurt, what are you substituting the heroin production or the poppy production with? Big question there. How are you going to let people make a living through farming, which is, it's an agricultural nation? You do have urban population areas, but so there's a corruption that was there that's still there. I mean, Karzai left. His brother, I believe, was shot or assassinated by a rival drug gang. And we had Ghani, who has been the president taking over the reins from Karzai, I guess the last 5 or 6 years. And Ghani kind of split. it's kind of like they get a ticket to Miami or someplace, courtesy the CIA, that gets them out of there, because most of these people, and I mean, there's different facets. We have the U.S. military there, civilians, but we also have had the CIA operating in Afghanistan. And the CIA kind of set the tone in the 80s because in an effort to undermine the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, they started encouraging Afghani farmers to grow poppies for heroin production. The heroin was used to get money for the mujahideen, the jihad, the country people that were involved in this guerrilla warfare against the occupying Soviet forces. Does that sound about right to you, Kurt?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's interesting, the CIA kind of let the genie out of the bottle by, I think, by encouraging heroin production, actually using its one of its cover organizations, U.S. Aid International, to build an irrigation canal system in southern Afghanistan that solely helped irrigate the poppy fields. So, and of course, you've got an uptick in heroin addiction not only in Afghanistan and neighboring Pakistan, because the drug is moved over to Pakistan, where it is processed in labs, if not done already in Afghanistan, and then goes abroad. And as was the case with crack cocaine in the 80s, heroin, we saw a big spike not only in our cities, American cities, but also in suburban and rural populations. And we're still plagued with the abuse of opioids that have been produced from poppy derivatives, so opium derivatives. So it's, I don't want to overuse the word interesting, but it's a very much an alphabet soup of involvement. And it's difficult really to get a handle on what's going on, because you have an arm of the government that's working against the open arm of the government, the shadow arm of the government, and that's what I consider the CIA. It's shadow operations that never see the light of day. I believe that at one time in the 80s, when they were trying to undermine the Soviets in Afghanistan, they were spending upwards to $800 million a year. 1980s, $800 million a year on weaponry, on other tactics, in getting the warlords united, or the drug lords united against the Soviet Union and as the occupying force. And so the genie is out of the bottle. The CIA has a very limited presence in the late 90s while the Taliban is in charge. And then all hell breaks loose after the 9/11 attack, and it's carte blanche, or it's a green pass for the U.S. to go in to the Middle East and kick some butt. Iraq, for example. And it's a quagmire. It's a quagmire that has lasted 20 years, that has cost 130,000 Afghani civilian lives, 22,000 American casualties, that's including soldiers and civilian contractors. 2,400 lives were lost, 2,400 killed in action over there, again including soldiers, military, and civilians. And we're leaving like we did Saigon, whereby people are grabbing onto the runners, the skids of a helicopter as it's leaving the roof of the American embassy in Saigon, a city that is being surrounded at that time by Viet Cong. And I wonder, I feel there's kind of this this kind of a gray cloud, because I don't think we'll ever be involved in a nuclear exchange. I don't think we'll be involved in a war with a world power. I think it'll be much sneakier than that. It will not be an overt war. It'll be a series of cyber attacks, virus attacks, chemical weapons through medicines, and propaganda, corruption, and people paying access to our Congress and senators. And this shadow arm of the government that seems to outlast all administrations. You find this interesting, Kurt. I looked under a company, you may have heard of this company called DynCorp, DynCorp. Have you ever heard of DynCorp International?
I have not.
Okay. Their name came up in a report I read. They manage our bases in Afghanistan. By that I mean they handle logistics, they handle housekeeping, they handle facilities, the infrastructure. They were originally they were originally an aviation support company, and they also do intelligence training and data collection. Now that they're listed as a military contractor, and they've been in Vietnam with our military since the beginning, for 20 years. Now, they have a headquarters in the United States. Any guess where that headquarters might be? Speaking of a shadow government.
Who knows, Washington?
You're very close. Talking about a suburb of Washington, D.C.
Ah.
A suburb that if I told you of in Virginia, if I gave you the name of the town, you would recognize it immediately. It's not Arlington. It's it's not near the cemetery. McLean, Virginia.
Okay, all right.
Do you know what three-letter agency has their headquarters in McLean, Virginia?
I'm only going to guess. I'm assuming that's what is it, the NSA?
No, you're close. Begins with a C.
Oh, the CIA, okay.
Yeah, the CIA, by coincidence, has its headquarters in McLean, Virginia. And besides the CIA actually does have an office with the Eagle and Central Intelligence Agency, the symbol or emblem. But they also have operations in other buildings or other companies that have innocuous sounding names. Now, I'm not going to say I'm right, but I would bet money that DynCorp is one of those. It's a CIA operation. So we have the CIA, in my opinion, if I'm wrong, someone please prove me wrong, that is in charge of logistics, housekeeping, facilities for our military. Now, do the military and the CIA have the same goals in Vietnam? Vietnam, that was the Freudian slip. In Afghanistan.
Yeah.
In Afghanistan. I'm not going to answer that. I'll let you think about that. What were the goals of the military in Afghanistan? Kurt, could you come up with one goal for our military in Afghanistan over the last 20 years? Why were we there?
Well, I think the idea is to promote democracy in Afghanistan and human rights, you know, that were not enjoyed by women and so forth.
Okay. Would you say that was a main goal or a side goal?
I think publicly it was probably a public goal, and I think the other thing is basically to have a centralized base. We didn't maintain one in Iraq, and I mean it would be a jump-off point for military involvement in the community.
Okay. All right. That certainly was one thing that changed in a positive way, that young girls, or girls, period, women, were able to go to school, receive an education, which under Sharia law is not permitted. Women were also able to go around without a burqa, walk alone, talk with people who were not within their family. Under Sharia law, a woman cannot, first of all, a single woman doesn't talk to anyone she doesn't know. And she wouldn't talk to a single man or a man who was not in her family. Again, that's part of the private behavior control. So that had opened up. Women could have had a lot of rights that we take for granted in the West, but were not available to them while the Taliban was there ruling. So yes, that certainly was a change. But I think, and this is the Achilles heel, you have a culture that's based on 2,000 years of practice. And you have a culture that is hard, a religious or spiritual culture based on a book, the Quran, and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. Is it reasonable to expect that to change, the public's acceptance or the public's living with that in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, without some type of bloodshed? My answer would be no. There's resistance, and the resistance is bared out when you look at, and we mentioned this last week, the Pew Research Institute polled Afghans, and I'm going to say males, men. They did not poll women because that would not have been proper. Women do not have a legal voice, or if they have a voice, it has half the weight of a man's. And 87% of the respondents supported Sharia law. 87. As comparison, in Pakistan, it's about 84. These were recent. These weren't 20 years ago. These were maybe 5 years ago. So there's certainly male support for Sharia law now in Afghanistan. And I'm wondering, there's going to be bloodshed. There is bloodshed because, as we discussed last week with Sharia law, you're either with us or against us. And if you try to convert one of our own or bring one of our own outside of our belief system, outside of Islam, that's punishable by death. Do you remember talking about that, Kurt?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So I think what's going to happen is the Taliban will have a very comfortable time of it. I think they're going to have trouble dealing with the opium trade and bringing that under some kind of control, because if they are fundamentalists, Islamists, that means no alcohol and no drugs, no heroin, none of that. So they're going to have to find a substitute for those farmers for this part of their economy. And speaking of that, because we have to close, Kurt, did you get, are you watching us on video right now?
I am.
All right.
I am.
Do you recognize what this is? This is my guest tonight. And I did not have time to put a face on the guest. Right now, the guest is asleep. But can you see this right now? Do you know what
Yes,
this is? Do you know what
Trying
this
to
is?
understand why it's there.
Oh, well, that's the cinch, that's the clincher. What is this, by the way?
Well, it's a cutting wheel. I generically call those die grinders.
Right. It's a cordless, and I'm going to give DeWalt a plug because DeWalt, I've never had trouble with DeWalt products. So, endorsement, even though they aren't paying me yet. DeWalt endorsement for the cordless cutting wheel or grinder. He just came alive. Now, where does this grinder get its power from, Kurt? Do you know? Yes, you do, because you're an electrical
Probably lithium
engineer.
batteries.
Lithium batteries. So I'm going to take his lithium battery out. Ah, come on. I just endorsed the product, and there we go. I can't remove the battery. Here's the lithium battery. Now, the Chinese are interested in making lithium batteries. Do you know where the lithium for their batteries is going to come from in the future, if they have their way?
I'd love to know because a lot of it's from China.
Afghanistan. Lithium,
Hooray.
the largest source of lithium in the world is Afghanistan. Why do you think the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, rushed to endorse and recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Kabul, of Afghanistan? Because they're looking to trade with the Taliban and get some of that lithium that they have in the mountains. So they can make batteries so that Billy Boy here and everybody else can have their cordless drills, their grinders, their saws, anything else that doesn't have to be plugged in. So, we may be going in a cycle. Initially, as we said before, the British were in Afghanistan. They had their butts kicked. The Soviet Union was in Afghanistan. They had their butts kicked in the 80s. The knots in the teens of this century, the Americans were in Afghanistan and got their butts kicked. Now it's the Chinese turn. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see, first of all, how the Taliban makes the transition away from heroin trade, away from the opium trade, and what role, if any, the CIA maintains in Afghanistan. And really, if people in Congress and in the Senate will ever wake up and question why we are in another country for 20 years, why we are willing to spend, I mean, it's only money, $4 billion a year in Afghanistan. Billion. We have spent since 2001 $2 trillion in Afghanistan. Why we're spending this money without getting a return? Why we have 22,000 wounded, 2,400 casualties, people who are dead. And what's the end result? We leave with our tail between our legs. So I think you and I should keep if we can, and it's so many distractions, but I would expect at least our elected representatives in Senate and Congress will keep an eye on where we are sending our military, why, what the game plan is, what's the end result, and if that end result is not met in a timely manner, then we change game plan and we actually start criminally investigating some people. I would start with General Milley, who said he could not foresee this happening. I don't know what planet his command post is on, but it's not in Afghanistan. So, on that happy note, Kurt, is there anything else that you would like to add to our discussion?
Well, again, looking at the events since last week, let's just hope that we can indeed get all of our Americans that are still remaining in Afghanistan out safely. You know, somehow they managed to still have operations in the airport, and apparently they can estimate they can bring out thousands per day. But let's just hope that continues and that the Taliban doesn't, you know, cut that airport off, and then suddenly whoever remains becomes like a replay of Tehran, you know, where we have hostages now, or worse. So let's just hope they all get out safely, and maybe someday we learn from our lessons.
I don't know. We haven't learned from Vietnam. But I think, and I just thought of the Berlin airlift. Maybe if the U.S. military maintains a corridor, a safety corridor for flights to go in and out of Kabul, then it will be possible to bring out people who wish to leave a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. So we'll see. I guess the only thing you can do is pray for a minimal amount of bloodshed and pray for a moment of enlightenment with the administration and with both houses of Congress.
There you go.
All right, Kurt. Take care, and we'll talk again soon. I appreciate you coming in and being my sidekick this evening.
You're more than welcome.
All right.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure is mine. Everyone, have a good weekend. The sun is going to be coming out Saturday. And I wish everybody a pleasant Thursday evening. See you next Thursday at 5:45. God bless and take care. So long, Kurt.
Take care.